Louise Bedford here, your host of the Talking Trading podcast. This is how traders excel. Now, some of you who do know me quite well will know that I lost my voice completely for 2 years a while back, and it actually took me even 9 months to be able to make any sound at all. And it was a peculiar time in my life that after I had told that story on a recent episode of Talking Trading, I got an email from a person and he said, I lost my voice for 4 days once and it wasn't that bad. So what are you complaining about? Okay. So sometimes we have to realize that stress comes in 2 distinct ways. One is a volcano. So everything that happens in a volcano happens fast. Sometimes there's no warning and your life is thrown into disarray. And then the other type of stress is that ongoing pressure that we feel, and often traders do feel subject to the grind, where we have to keep on going and there doesn't seem to be a lot of acknowledgement and we have to be very internally driven. Now, that is why I've invited Luke Mathers back to the show. Now, Luke Mathers is from lukemathers.com.au, and he has actually provided me with so much solace and support over these exact issues. Now, I want to tell you a little bit more about Luke because he has been on the show before, but if you haven't caught that show, I'll pop into the show notes on talkingtrading.com.au Luke's previous episode link so that you can listen to that also. Now, I want to give you a bit of background about Luke because he has combined insights from neuroscience as well as ancient wisdom. And I love that because not only does he train entrepreneurs and Olympians in how to combine these aspects for themselves so that they are completely independent of him, which I think is always a sign of a good coach and a good mentor. He's also the author of 3 best-selling books. Now, I just love Curious Habits. That's definitely one that I think everybody should read. And then there's also Stress Teflon, and Stress Teflon's a very personal look at how to deal with stress. And we will be touching on some of these issues today. And Reset. And he shares his distinctive approaches in these books. And eliminating stress is not the solution. So that is what we are here to learn about from Luke today. How do we deal with pressure? How do we interpret pressure so that we don't become stressed by either the volcano or the grind? Now, Luke, I know I'm throwing you in here, but is that how you think of stress? And you've got those 2 separate parts, or have you got another idea about how it all comes together?
I just can't concentrate on your questions until I hear, how did you lose your voice for 2 years?
I know. I got an evil virus, and the last time that I spoke without all these years of voice therapy was the 15th of December, 2019. So through the pandemic, lost my voice, had to communicate with a laptop with a Bluetooth keyboard, and lots of writing. And my daughter, my youngest, even learnt sign language for me so that if we were out and I didn't have a pen and paper, she could interpret what I was wanting to the world. And it's kind of tough to have a podcast during that time. But look, after each speech therapy lesson, I get a little bit better. And I've been doing speech therapy every week since I found the speech therapist that could help. And it has been a heck of a journey. But I do think that aspect where sometimes we underestimate how grateful we need to be for our basic facilities, it eludes us.
Yeah.
When we're under pressure, we take it for granted that we'll always be able to operate.
Yeah, it's an amazing concept that how big a deal gratitude is. Gratitude is something that it gets thrown around a lot, but I don't think we actually really utilize it as well as we could. One concept that I love is by Dan Sullivan and Benjamin Hardy. They wrote a book called The Gap and the Gain. I don't know if you've heard about this. And the gap and the gain, if you imagine there's a continuum, if you can just draw a line across a bit of paper now and put a cross at either end, And think of one end, the left-hand side as being the sort of where you were, half a lifetime ago. The right-hand side being where you want to be. Where do you sit on that continuum somewhere? And we all sit somewhere along there. And there's always a gap between where we are and where we want to be. And I think, how do we narrow that gap from where I am to where I want to be and make that as small? Because the world is telling us to make that bigger. You need this car, you need these abs, you need all of this other stuff. And I looked at their work and loved that idea of the gap between where I am and where I want to be. And with traders and stuff, they look at that all the time, and to be able to sort of say, if I get to X amount and X amount, then it's all going to be great. And I'm actually not sure it is. I think that will help for sure, but it's not going to fix everything. And I think my way after reading that was to, okay, how can I make the gap smaller? And it was with gratitude for all the things I've learned, all the things I know. You wouldn't for a moment think I really want to lose my voice for 2 years, but have a look at the opinion you have of yourself now, after getting through that and going to speech therapy, and you have an amazingly articulate voice now, and to be grateful for that. Acceptance is another part, and we might talk a little bit about the fork in the stress trade later. And acceptance is huge. That you've got to accept that this is what's happened. It might have been one of my big stocks I'd really gone heavy in has dropped like a stone, and acceptance. And the other part is purpose. That if we have gratitude, acceptance, and purpose, I think we get a lot closer from where we are to where we want to be, and that kind of narrows that gap. And I think that being able to sort of look back of 2 years of having your daughter doing sign language for you and having to write things down and all of that sort of stuff with gratitude, acceptance, and purpose, I actually think narrows that gap. And if it had turned out that you didn't get your voice back, you would have lived with it. You would have worked it out. They've done some really cool research on people who have won the lotto. And what they found is they got really, really happy for a bit when they won the lotto. And then they came back to basically their baseline level of happiness. And the same thing happens with someone who, say, becomes a paraplegic. Their level of happiness will drop like a stone in that moment that they realize they're not going to be able to walk again. But it eventually comes up to around about the same sort of baseline they had before. Mm. So all of these things we think are going to, I love the idea of if then, and putting I'll be happy at the end of it. And almost always when we get to that, it's actually not really as true as we thought.
Because that's the arrival fallacy, isn't it? That we delay exactly our happiness in our mind. Once I've got married, I'll be happy. Once I've had children, I'll be happy. Unfortunately, even if you ask 90-year-olds, and really at some stage we have to stop and harness the power within us and realize, I didn't mean for it to be about me today, but I'll just leave you with one extra little aspect about my voice. People asked, how did I maintain a podcast? I had a host who did the majority of the lion's share of the speaking. But interestingly, I had recorded 2 years worth of psychological segments up my sleeve. So it was interesting to me that it took me roughly 2 years to be able to speak coherently. And I had 2 years up my sleeve. It was almost like I needed the pressure to get better by this stage. So it's a fascinating thing. And the other aspect, and this is definitely personal, the other aspect of this is that one of the members of our mentor program had cancer of the tongue, and he only had 2% of his tongue left. So he will never speak again. And he, as a source of comparison, made me realize that, yes, I can keep going if I don't ever get my voice back, but also how lucky am I that I can still swallow? I can actually eat. I don't have to think in advance before going out to somewhere where I don't know the food. There's so many aspects to this where sometimes we compare ourselves upward, but actually there are a lot of people, if we compared ourselves on the other side of that equation, where...
Well, humans don't. We don't compare ourselves down. We only compare ourselves upward. And it's like that idea of keeping up with the Joneses. The moment you've kept up with the Joneses long enough, you end up finding new Joneses. We just move the bar. We keep moving goalposts. And it's that kind of idea that we're putting happiness or success or whatever we want, or joy, on the other side of some sort of cognitive horizon, and we're swimming as hard as we can for this horizon, and we're never going to get there because we're just going to keep moving it backwards. So how do we stop doing that is probably a really cool, and I think that's where gratitude, acceptance, and purpose come into it, because they become the things that sort of, okay, I'm accepting that this is where I am, and there's a whole bunch of reasons that got me to there. I'm grateful for everything I've learned in the past and all the gains I've built on. And my purpose is to be this, and have that purpose as something that's a bigger, better offer. It's something that I'm going for. And I really like the idea of it being infinite. I know everyone says you've got to have goals and they've got to be smart goals and all that sort of stuff. I get that. But I think that one again is another rundown. I think we've got to have infinite goals of the human we want to turn up is and how we contribute to the world. I think that's one of the things about being a sole trader too. I don't know a lot about this, but one of the things about it is that making money is a wonderful thing, and it's good, and it affords you and your family to be able to do things you need to do. But I think there's part of us that we have a need to contribute as well. So how are we using part of that purpose? It might be to do the trading and do the things we need to do, but how are we using some of our other time to make sure that we're contributing to the world? Because there's an ABCs to stress Teflon, which is awareness, belonging, and contribution. And I think even if we're doing really, really well in everything, we've got to have a tribe, and we've got to have a tribe that we belong, and we've got to contribute to that tribe somehow. So sometimes a lot of these solitary sort of things where it's all about, can I get my portfolio as good as it can be? It's going to be good, but you're going to have to find other places in the world that you're finding purpose that are more than just about you and how much money you can make.
It's so true. And also the other aspect to that is that people tinker with their plan and they get very involved in changing minor details when actually they should just have the patience to let it run and to keep on applying the same process again and again and again. Because eventually that outcome, if you've got a robust system, will come through for you. And it does remind me of your thoughts about the sea squirt, where the sea squirt seeks pleasure and avoids pain. Could you tell us more about that, Luke?
Yeah, it's really weird that I've used the star of a book to be a thing that's about an inch long and swims around in the ocean. It doesn't seem like it should be appropriate for humans, which are a lot more complex than that. But a sea squirt's only got about 20,000 neurons. It's got a very, very small brain. And it basically goes towards the parts of the ocean that has nutrients and clean water. And it goes away from the parts of the ocean that have sewage and awful stuff and things that are going to eat it. And so it's really simple. It's got 20,000 neurons towards good, away from bad. All right. And I think we've all kind of got one of those in our brain. We've also all got one of those. And what a sea squirt does, it gets to a point where it's found a good spot in the ocean. It attaches to the sea floor, and then it eats its own brain. It just says, I'm not going to change anymore. Here's where I'm staying. And it eats its own brain. It doesn't need that anymore. I told this story to a workshop I was running at the Gold Coast City Council for some of their leaders. And one of the people piped up and said, we've got whole departments of sea squirts. They're everywhere. They've eaten their brain years ago, and they're just staying with the habits that they have. And I think we've got to get curious about our habits. We've got to get curious about what causes them, got curious about what to change. I mean, really curious about some of our reactions that we do to things that are stressful. And it might be like, oh my God, that thing's dropped 5 points. I have to sell. Or do you? Is the strategy of the company as good as it ever has been? And all of those sorts of bigger picture things, are they still the same? But understanding our reactions and the fork in the stress road, I think, tells us a lot about this. We'll wander along a road, and there's always a fork, and what happens is I might actually put it, for those who are watching this on YouTube, you'll see this. For others, I'll describe it. There's a little fork in the stress road, and basically what happens is your old brain, your limbic brain, will go off when something stressful happens. And the first shitty response, the first response that we get is threat, right? Because if that wasn't the case, 10,000 years ago when we got eaten by tigers, we wouldn't have contributed to evolution. But I think when we decide to do what we want to do, we turn that into a challenge response. And there's almost like, in most cases, there's an above the line and a below the line response to this stuff. And sort of, if it was running away from a tiger, by all means, get angry, run, fear, do whatever you like. Fear is a really good response to that. But most of the time, fear isn't the response that's going to help us. And I think there's a line, and you don't need me to tell you where the line is, but below it, I think we have things like anger. Anger very rarely solves anything. If you actually do have to fight or something, anger might help, but most of the time we're not. I think above that we have denial. We tell ourselves story. Denial and distraction, both of those go together very well in that, like, oh, something bad's happened, my C-squirt doesn't like it, anger, denial, a two possible response. One of the ones that can happen, and it happens a lot, I'm finding, particularly with younger people, is one of their responses I think is sort of just below the line is apathy. If it's something that I cared a lot about and it hasn't gone the way I wanted to, all of a sudden I don't care about it anymore and it doesn't matter and I'll just phone it in. And I think apathy to me is, it can look as if it's laziness, but I think apathy to me is a way to regulate your emotions. That if I stop caring about it, it's not going to actually have an emotional response to me anymore. What are your thoughts on that, Louise?
I think apathy can come in two ways. Excuse me. Often with stress, we are inadequately being able to handle the demands that the pressure-filled environment is placing on us. So if you've constantly been fed that this is the way to react, you won't be good enough. You're unable to do this challenge and it's too hard from a very early stage. That can balance our thermostat down to the point when we're presented with a new challenge, we don't have self-belief. So I think it's more than just laziness. I think it is something where if people don't have that self-agency, where they feel they can overcome an obstacle, that becomes a feedback loop. Because you have said that it's not our focus to eliminate stress. It's actually our focus to harness stress. And I think that might be a part of that. Tell me more.
Yeah. And I think what apathy does, it just sort of says, there's stress here, I'm not going to deal with it, and don't. And if we go, well, what would an above the line reaction that's sort of different to that be? And I think that's where acceptance comes into it. Acceptance that this is the situation we're in, this is how we are. And what acceptance does, it gives you a base to then work out where I'm going to go next. All right. And if we have acceptance, right, apathy is this is what's happened, I can't do anything about it. Acceptance is not far, it's only maybe 2 or 3% different, but it's here's where I am. Okay, where am I going to go? And that gives us some control, it gives us some autonomy, and it gives us some ability to be able to sort of use what we do as our future rather than be locked into it, everything. And I think that's the above the line things would be, if our stress response starts off with anger, denial, and apathy, then I think the above the line ones are acceptance, curiosity, and courage. And that's acceptance is this is where we are. Curiosity to say, okay, I've got some options here, and the courage to actually take the option that might be a bit difficult. You're in a C-squirt, might not like it, but I'm courageous enough to do the thing that's difficult. And I think that's when we have a challenge response. And that's if we want to harness stress, we've got to use our challenge response to a stress rather than our threat response to stress. And I think that's where we work out whether something's above the line or below the line.
Mm. And do you think above the line is actually still the old brain, or is that a slightly higher brain functioning process?
I think when you're going above the line, you're making a choice. And when you're making a choice, a deliberate choice, you're always using your prefrontal cortex. You're always using your new brain. So, when you look at things like acceptance, that's sort of acknowledging what's going on and here's where I am. My stock's dropped 50 points or whatever. That's where I am. But now I'm going to be curious about what my options are. And then I'm going to be courageous enough to make the option that's in line with, my decisions and my values and what I think I need to do. And I think that's where our sort of old brain, which is all of our emotions and stuff, and our new brain come together. If we're going to trade well, we've got to have our old brain and our new brain together. I don't think we can do that. I think almost everyone who's listening to this will have worked out that I've made some really bad decisions at the time when I've made emotional choices. And I'm not an expert on trading. That's more your thing, Louise. But I think a lot of the mistakes we made will be when we're getting ruled by our emotional brain.
Yes, it's so true. It's the knee-jerk reaction. It's I'm on a roll, so I can do no wrong. I will just pop these trades on before I run out the door, and that way I'll make a heck of a lot of mistakes with the data entry. They're the types of things that catch people. But the other big thing that I think is catching traders at the moment is self-sabotage. I'm hearing it more and more, and I'd really like your views on this. One of the aspects that you alerted me to, which I thought was fantastic, was SAD, sad behaviors. Could you talk to me a little bit more about these precursors to a self-sabotage cycle?
Yeah, self-sabotage is a weird thing. One of the things about humans is we love to be right. All right. And we definitely like to be right. Being right to one feels nice. The C squared in you likes to be nice. And one of the things that we can do to sabotage ourselves is we can sort of say, oh, that'll never work. And when it doesn't work, yeah, you go, oh, yeah, it didn't work. Oh, at least I was right about it not working. I call it undesirability bias, which I'm not sure there's any scientific sort of backup for that. But I think we do have a bias to look at the things that are undesirable. They happen, and then we end up sort of explaining them away. But so at least I was right. It's almost like the booby prize in the bowl of cornflakes that you sort of think, oh, I really want this little plastic bit of crap, and it actually doesn't achieve anything and doesn't give us anything except empty carbs, I guess. Just to mix some metaphors there. Yeah, but yeah, those sort of sad behaviors.
So it's these self-aggressive and destructive behaviors. So that's the meaning of the acronym.
So to be able to, almost abusing yourself. It goes back to a lot of self-talk. A lot of the work I do when I'm coaching clients and a lot of the work I do in workshops is all about getting really deliberate about our self-talk. All right. And that sort of, one of the things I sort of often say, if someone talked to me the way I sometimes talk to me, I'd probably punch them in the head. All right. And I'm not a violent human. All right. Because we wouldn't put up with other people talking to us the way we are. And so to be able to catch that and sort of say, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. So that sort of, speaking to yourself poorly, speaking to yourself aggressively and sort of putting yourself down is something that fuels that sort of undesirability bias that, I'm no good, I don't deserve this. And when it goes wrong, you say, see, I told you I'm no good, I didn't deserve this, and it didn't happen. So how do we actually catch that and sort of, find an above the line solution with things like gratitude, acceptance, and purpose? And how do we actually go above the line with that response? Because if we're worried about a bad thing happening and we're thinking we deserve the bad thing to happen, there's a fair chance it's going to happen.
Yeah. And with traders, it can often be not even quite trading related with those aggressive to self type of behaviors. It can be that you have a little car crash, nothing too drastic, but you weren't concentrating. It can be that you overindulged in alcohol, that you maxed out your credit card, that you did a little bit of online gambling, whoops, that you overindulged on the latest online shopping, that you weren't meaning to spend that much. It's going over your budget. It's eating too much chocolate, which is my thing. It's eating too many carbs. If
you're not on your own, Louise.
That is actually one of my original triggers to realize, hang on, something's not good here. I think the study that shows with behaviors and habits, if you have got healthy habits, you, under periods of pressure, more likely to revert to those healthy habits. And isn't that amazing? It's not just the bad habits. So if you're actually going towards those bad habits, and it can be a precursor to self-sabotage, that means that you haven't done the prior work to create those good habits so that when you're under pressure, you can drop back into those good habits. I'd love your thoughts about that.
You drop into your defaults, don't you? I love the concept that the pathways in your brain, the way you think is very much like water and electricity. It's going to take the path of least resistance. And neurons in your brain that wire together fire together. So what happens is the more you think a certain thing, the more you're going to think a certain thing. And it's almost like there's a road between Brisbane and the Gold Coast. It's called the M1. It's huge, massive big road, 6 lanes wide both ways. And it's huge. But as you're driving to Brisbane, if you look over to your right, there's a little 2-lane road that rolls up and down the hills next to the M1. And when I was a kid back in the 80s, that road was the M1. That was the major road between Brisbane and the Gold Coast. All right. And that road's still there. So our old pathways are still going to be there, but we've got to do the work to build the new 6-lane motorway. All right. And what we've got to do is make sure that 6-lane motorway is taking us where we want to go. So the more we repeat the things that are actually serving us, the more we then take notice of that thing served us, that was good, I want to do that again, the more we're actually reinforcing those pathways. And then what's going to happen when it comes to our defaults, our brain's going to take the path of least resistance. And it's a probably convoluted way to say that what we think and how we act and what we do, if we can make those things as repetitive as we can, we're more likely to default to that rather than the ones that don't serve us.
Because you don't want to end up the unhappy achiever.
Yeah, the unhappy achiever is a really weird thing. We all like to achieve, and achievement feels good, but are we striving towards the achievement because it's something that we want, or are we sort of using achievement to run away from something that we don't want? And I think there's a lot of people that do that. I have a client of mine that was, he's a younger bloke. He's really, really successful in what he does, and he beats himself up if he hasn't got a six pack. I don't think I've ever had a six pack, so I don't know what that would feel like. But he'll beat himself up if he hasn't. And I was trying to work out whether he was going towards this idea of I want to be fit and healthy, or whether he's running away from, unless I have a six pack, I'm not worthy. And that's a really small difference, but it's a really big difference into why you're doing the stuff you're doing. Am I doing it to prove that I'm worthy, or am I doing it because it's something I really want to do? And that's a curious habit to have a look at. If you're putting your worth on the other side of achieving something, I think it's a thing that's fraught with danger, because you're always going to have to achieve something else to then find that happiness again. Whereas when we have gratitude, acceptance, and purpose, we're going to thrive from wherever we are. We're going to accept that where we are is where we are, and we're going to thrive from that. Whereas if we're having to run away from something, it gets a little bit harder.
And what you've touched on there is approach goals versus avoidance goals. So the one that I thought really jumped out to me as an example here is Alison Felix, who is an athlete and certainly quite an amazing runner. Now, she initially in 2012, she'd gone through a few unfortunate races where she hadn't won. Now, it's all depending on how you frame this, isn't it? So she said to herself, as she lined up for the Olympics, I just don't want to lose. Now, that is one way of phrasing it. Now, unfortunately, when she didn't lose and she won, she actually didn't feel that good about it, because she had an avoidance goal. And even though, yes, she got to the goal of winning, her emotional state wasn't victory. So what she did is she became, and with her coaches, became aware of this. And she changed this into an approach goal. And the approach goal said, when I win, rather than when I do not lose. And that approach goal, when she did win, then she actually felt those feelings that create that feedback loop that organized her brain in the way that she wanted to chase that more and to have more.
Her inner C squirt said, that feels great to win. I want to do that again. Let's do it again. What processes and things do I put in place so that I can approach that again? Because that felt awesome. Yeah. You could take it back to something as simple as orgasm. The human body's designed like this. We're designed to orgasm. If orgasms, felt like slamming your genitals in a car door, the human race would be doomed, right? But orgasm feels great, so we want to do it again. So running away from something probably doesn't feel quite so good. It's just like, oh, I'm safe. Whereas actually that approach goals you're talking about feels wonderful. Let's do that again. It's like orgasm, chocolate, and all the fun things in life. Let's do that again because it feels good.
But also,
love that.
In the pendulum of life, what we know about dopamine means that if we're always in that sort of phase of our life where it's happiness, then that becomes our new level and we don't enjoy it as much. So I think sometimes to purposefully push our pendulum back into things where we're exercising until we puke, where we are combating our own thoughts and that feels uncomfortable, where we're having that difficult discussion with our spouse, that is also part of being human and realizing that we are that pendulum. And I do want to talk about relationships, because you have some terrific views, and some of my traders, and this isn't everybody, but some of my traders find it very difficult when they don't have a supportive spouse if they're trading alongside having a partner. Some parents, depending on the age of our traders, some parents may have some disrupting comments to their children if the children are trading, and the children can be 40 years old. Some children have disruptive comments to their parents if they're trading, and that can throw my traders into turmoil. Now, I'd really love your thoughts about relationships and what can my traders do to make sure they stay in that trading zone.
Yeah, it's a weird one in that there's I have a concept I call concern trolling, and concern trolling is a weird thing that I think when you are aware of this, you're going to see it a lot. It's like, I'm going to buy a red car, and you look around and find red cars everywhere. And we see concern trolling a lot, and it's someone will phrase an express or something that they're saying to you, and they'll phrase it from a place of concern. I'm really worried about you, Louise, that you're spending so much time on your work situation and so much time doing all of these things that I'm afraid that, you're getting a little bit too caught up in whatever, or you're getting big for your boots or whatever it is. And they're phrasing it like concern when actually all it is judgment. They're judging you for a certain reason. And it might be because they're not brave enough to do the thing you're doing. It might be that they're worried about the end result that might happen, and they don't have as much faith in you as what they should. And I think to be able to call concern trolling out, and to be able to sort of, even you don't necessarily have to pull it to the other person, but don't let it affect you. To be able to just say, they're concern trolling me here. That's something that can definitely happen. I have some people in my world that I love to bits, and they love me back, and I still see them do this. They sort of think, why wouldn't you? I used to own very large businesses that were really, really successful, and now I have just me, and I do lots of really cool stuff that I just love doing, and it helps the world, and it's wonderful. And sometimes I get this, why wouldn't you go back and do this other thing that you'd done forever? Like, I used to be an optometrist, so I used to test eyes for a living, which is a lovely job, and you get to meet really nice people. But I've asked which one's clearer, this one or that one, 9.5 million times, and I have no intention of asking it again. But I got some concern trolling about that. It was, why would you step away from these really successful businesses? And the reason I did was because more money wasn't going to make me any happier. More money wasn't going to light my boat. More money wasn't going to make me curious, creative, and generous, and all of those things I want to be. So what can I do how can I set up my world so it's how I want to be? And concern trolling, those people will have their own reason why they're concern trolling. It might be that you're going to spend my inheritance. It might be that you're not going to be safe. And, to be able to ask that sort of, I call them splinter questions. We all have these conversations that are like a splinter stuck in our hand. They're going to hurt to take the splinter out, but we can't just leave it in there and fester. So how do we actually have those conversations from a place of being able to have your intention really clear? I think one of the things we do before a difficult conversation, I'd be interested to see whether you do this as well, Louise, is that we roll that conversation around in our head a few times. Do you ever do that?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah. Most of us do. And I'm actually, what I'm doing now is when I catch myself rolling a conversation around in my head, I then sort of say, okay, let's step out of that conversation, because I'm an articulate human, and so are you, and you'll be able to have the conversation. Let's get clear about my intention. All right. And a friend of mine, Georgia Murch, has a great expression that people hear your content, but they smell your intent. So to be able to sort of question, what's your intention for the concern trolling? I really want to understand what your fears are here. And the person might be aware enough to be able to state them, they might not. But I think if you're aware that someone's concern trolling you, then don't let that sort of dishearten you. If you reckon you're on the right path and what you're doing is a good path and that's where you're going to go, by all means, stick to it.
Yeah, I love it. So you're
Get clear about their intention.
That curiosity to find out what's behind that. And one of the things that I've taught my traders to do as well is to work out and to express to the person concern trolling them when that line will be that they'll stop trading. So I know both of us are a big fan of the if-then statement, taken directly from computer programming. So in
Yep.
trading, how it represents is, and in this situation, if I lose 25% of my money or our money, as the case may be, then I will. Now, I would suggest some of the actions you can take: stop trading, only execute the stops on the ones that are hitting their stop loss and not entering into new trades. You could consult a higher authority, whether it's a mentor. I act as that for a lot of traders. So tell the person that you care for exactly what the then will look like and under
So what my
what
safety nets are,
parameters.
is that what you're
Um,
saying?
at this particular point, then I will do that. Because sometimes you are threatening your spouse's security and their level of confidence in your future together. I'm talking about a spouse now, but it might be a child. You're a threat to them. So if they know that at this point, then you're going to pull the pin, then they will feel a lot more confident and at ease in themselves because you've ceased to become a threat. And once we take a threat out of the transaction, then they're more likely to be benevolent to you and not interrupt you while you're trading, because that's a big thing that traders sometimes have to combat. They will also pave the way because they will realize it's important to you. And the other aspect I'd suggest for our traders is say that this is important to me. This is really important to me. Say that because they may not realize that this is where you genuinely feel that you should end up and to inhabit. I think so often we expect our associates to be mind readers, and we think that they know it's important when we haven't actually said what is in our heart. Often we only tolerate the things that we continue to accept, and that feedback loop can keep on happening. I've found by breaking that cycle, using the if-then statement and saying that this is important to me and the reasons why, that can really help people break that mold of continual criticism from their spouse, parent, child.
Mm. I love the concept of having a truly curious question. We ask a lot of questions that are leading to where we think someone should go. And they're questions that are probably more judgmental or advice giving than they are to be truly curious. So to be able to actually use those words and say, Louise, I've got a really truly curious question for you. What do you think would happen if we lost 25% of our thing? What do you think I'd do in that situation? And then shut up. Because one of the things about it is we ask hard questions and then we jump in and don't let the silence do the heavy lifting.
Silence is so important.
Silence can do the heavy lifting for sure.
Luke Mathers from lukemathers.com.au. How can people get more of you in their lives? Because you have just been an inspiration to me. We definitely have a bond that is just almost cosmic here. It is so bizarre to me. So many of the things you say are things that I've thought about in the past, and you've come up with beautiful acronyms and solutions to help. My traders are going to love you, my friend. So how can people find out more about you, and what should people's next step be?
You can definitely go to lukemathers.com.au. There's a few books you can download Reset and Stress Teflon there. You can get Curious Habits from Amazon or wherever you get your books. So you can all of that. There's a few resources you can get there. The audio books are free on Spotify. So you can go to Spotify and just type in Reset and Luke Mathers and you'll find the audio books there. But yeah, I'd love everyone to sort of work on their habits and all of that sort of thing, but change the way they look at stress. Stress is not going away anytime soon. And we can't be sea squirts and run away from it. We've got to be able to embrace the hard bits and then let it slide off. And if we can do that, life gets pretty fun.
Absolutely. Oh, I've loved it, Luke. You're a superstar. And thank you so much to Leslie, my initial editor and publisher, and your current editor and publisher, for introducing us. Definitely research Luke Mathers through his website, lukemathers.com.au. And I've had a ball talking with you. So until next week, I hope you are continuing to talk trading. Good on you, Luke. Any parting words?
Thanks for having me, Louise. I always learn lots more from you than you do from me, I think. But it's always fun to chat. Good to see you.
So much fun. Thanks so much.